Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Definitely an Art of War video I'd love to watch. Scorched Earth. Russia's secret trick up its sleeve. Clearly it's smart. This is Scorched Earth is the tactic where the army that really doesn't give a crap about its people can, or I should say the army that really is worried about caring about its people and its land isn't going to be able to use. And so Russia, like, you have so much land. I would say they're even more kind of tyrannical than even European countries of the time of, say, the Russian Empire or Soviet Union. But yeah, it's a country that I feel like only China, only a certain few countries can pull off, right? Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm just completely wrong here.
Created equal.
Original link to the video, top of the description. Hope you guys are all doing well. Let's go.
All wars are not created equal. From the size and manpower of the two or more factions who've chosen to settle their disagreements violently, to the technologies and equipment available to each side at the time of battle, to the economic and human resources that each side counts on to win, every war is shaped by the conditions of conflict. But there's another critical question that must be answered when attempting to understand a war, another dimension that simply must be accounted for if you want to have any hope of understanding the entire thing. Just how far is each side willing to go? Atop the pyramid of wartime escalation, there are few destructive measures that can even come remotely close to the Scorched Earth policy, an approach to warfare so devastating, so utterly ruinous, that the entire point is to ensure that when the war ends, nothing is left behind. Kept in the forbidden reaches of a strategist's toolkit alongside such despicable acts as mass torture, ethnic cleansing, and the use of nuclear weapons, a Scorched Earth policy is one that wages war not just on enemy combatants, but civilians, nature, and the land itself. In today's installment of our Art of War series, we must admit there's very little art to be found. Instead, we shall discuss the practice of complete and total destruction with the express purpose that nothing survives in its wake.
Ready to learn? The method.
Since 1977, the use of Scorched Earth tactics have been prohibited outright by the Geneva Conventions, and for a brief encapsulation of what exactly Scorched Earth tactics entail, we'll refer to the Geneva Conventions directly. It is prohibited to attack, destroy, remove, or render useless objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population, such as foodstuffs, crops, livestock, drinking water installations and supplies, and irrigation works, for the specific purpose of denying them for the sustenance value to the civilian population or the adverse party, whatever the motive, whether in order to starve out civilians, to cause them to move away, or for any other motive.
This is where international laws don't make sense to me. It's like you're going to have Scorched Earth in the most, like, I feel like Scorched Earth is usually a sort of Hail Mary play, you know what I mean by that? People don't. A Hail Mary in football is like where, like, your only shot is to just throw the ball as far as you can and hope your receiver get. It's like you have nothing to lose, or like you're about to lose, and this is your last chance at success. If you use Scorched Earth from the beginning, that's a little messed up. But how are you going to enforce that if a country is going to resort to Scorched Earth, where it's either Scorched Earth or you get conquered? And so that's what I don't really understand with a lot of stuff like that. Like, it seems like they're more like, this is what you should do, rather than... Anyway, sorry, let's go.
Whether in order to starve out civilians, to cause them to move away, or for any other motive. Forceful words by the virtuous people of Geneva, and for good reason. A Scorched Earth policy is, in essence, an umbrella term, and it encapsulates a wide range of wartime acts that range from unsavory to downright despicable. But the thing that ties all Scorched Earth tactics together is one of intent, to deny the myriad benefits of a stretch of territory to one's enemy. If the land can produce food to sustain an enemy army, then a Scorched Earth policy dictates that the land must be made to stop producing food. If the land is replete with rivers and aquifers for the enemy to enjoy, then they must be ruined so thoroughly that the enemy dare not trust them. But there's one key issue to consider when it comes to Scorched Earth warfare, that an enemy military will almost never be the only people reliant on the land where a given war is fought. Instead, that land is tilled and maintained by civilians, innocents who raise families, build homes, and in an ideal world, hope to live out their lives there. A stretch of land might belong to the enemy today, but it belongs to those people for generations. A crop field or a herd of wildlife might sustain the army today, but the people of the region are the ones expecting to live off it. And if a river or a spring can provide clean drinking water to the enemy, then it's almost certainly doing the same for people who might like the enemy or might even dislike you, but really couldn't harm you if they tried. And herein lies the issue with the policy of Scorched Earth warfare. In order to ruin the land, the water, the ecosystems, the infrastructure, and the communities that allow an enemy to survive, one must innately accept responsibility for the wholesale destruction of the lives of thousands or even millions of non-combatants. Best case scenario, that might look like mass displacement or forced relocation. At other times, it amounts to slaughter, either by trapping said non-combatants into an area where no resources exist to sustain them, or killing them outright as part of the destruction of a given area. Of course, that doesn't always sound like too terrible an idea to an attacking army, and like any other element of the Geneva Conventions, or really any rule in life, the simple existence of a precise prohibition against Scorched Earth warfare should be enough to indicate that it does happen, and it happens a lot. In some cases, a military elects to adopt a Scorched Earth policy because its strategic value outweighs the importance of protecting civilians. In other cases, it's because that military's ideology or doctrine directly calls for the treatment of even non-combatants as an enemy.
Indeed, Scorched Earth policies are a mainstay of wars of genocide and annihilation.
And in wars where partisan resistance amongst ordinary people is so commonplace that the attacking military sees no use in distinguishing between the enemy and the locals. In practice, the tactics of Scorched Earth warfare are wide-ranging. When it comes to agriculture, the military might burn down crop fields or release hostile insects and parasites, knowing that vegetation will be wiped out. At other times, the land might itself come under attack, with fields or potentially productive plots of land being salted or otherwise ruined so that crops cannot grow there in the future. When it comes to water, the military might see to it that rivers and streams are deliberately poisoned, or that battles take place upstream of, say, a besieged city so that waters there will run red with blood and gore. They might poison reservoirs or drain them, destroy dams with the intent of depriving an area of its water supply, or to rush floodwaters downstream and destroy what lies in the path of the flood. They might even divert bodies of flowing water away from enemy positions with no care or consideration for the people who will need that water a year or a decade or a century from now.
So I'm thinking of the big examples that come up to me are the against Napoleon and then the Germans in World War II, the Russians doing it. But the more I think about it, would like the nuclear weapons be considered Scorched Earth, or is that just trying to, like, what is the difference between complete annihilation for annihilation's sake and Scorched Earth? Like, was Scorched Earth used in Vietnam by Americans bombing the Ho Chi Minh Trail? Or like, was the China releasing the dam to stop the Japanese? Is that Scorched Earth?
And when it comes to civilian infrastructure, the treatment is no less gentle. Hospitals that can treat enemy soldiers will be destroyed, no matter how many little old ladies need their cancer treatments and dialysis. Schools where the enemy can take shelter will be destroyed, regardless of whether those soldiers' children will ever learn to read. And roads, bridges, tunnels, and canals will be destroyed, no matter how vital they might be for the community or the region. That said, it's critical to emphasize that Scorched Earth tactics aren't only offensive in nature. Throughout history, many defending armies have employed Scorched Earth policies as they retreat, destroying the lands that
defensive Scorched Earth is what I think of immediately. So
pushed off of so that nothing remains for the attacker. In some cases, this might have the effect of denying resources that were the subject of an enemy invasion in the first place. In others, it might cause the enemy to deplete their supplies and reserves more quickly than they otherwise would. In the best case scenario for a retreating defender, an attacker might be forced to travel deeper and deeper into a wasteland until their supply line simply can't hold up, halting their advance indefinitely. Either way, when a Scorched Earth policy is adopted by a defender, the message is always the same. If we can't have our homeland, nobody can. All territories are not created equal in terms of their vulnerability to scorched earth tactics. Those that are protected by sea or by desert or by hills and mountain ranges may insulate their heartland well enough that it's unlikely to be threatened. For a place like that, just look at today's United States, where the country's agricultural belt is shielded by 2 oceans, 2 mountain ranges, a desert, a swampland, and thick northern forest.
The more I learn about it, the more I realize how lucky the USA has its geography. Like, even if you cross the oceans, you have to go through the Appalachians or the Rockies. Good luck. I guess the best way would be to invade by Canada or by the Gulf of Mexico. But then, there's not much to destroy here. And, okay, you can destroy a lot in Texas. But I realize just how protected America is geographically.
It is shielded by 2 oceans, 2 mountain ranges, a desert, a swampland, and thick northern forest. Conversely, smaller nations, or ones that feature low-lying, flat land, are particularly vulnerable to having their territory overrun and ruined for generations. Take, for example, Israel, where an enemy tank column could travel from the Golan Heights to Tel Aviv in the span of just a few hours. Those with a greater abundance of natural resources across their territory are, by and large, less likely to suffer from enemy scorched earth tactics. After all, what's the point in ruining one region's farmland if 10 surrounding regions can pitch in with surplus grain to spare? Instead, it's those territories with established agriculturally productive regions, those that rely on coastlines and oases, and those where cities are directly fed and supported by their surrounding territory, where scorched earth policies are most likely to benefit the enemy. And finally, the tactics employed in the name of scorched earth policies have both evolved with time, and in some cases, they've stayed the same. On the technologically advanced side, tactics like carpet bombing and the use of napalm are new and particularly destructive mechanisms of destruction. Certainly, they work much more effectively than giving a reserve battalion some torches and telling them to take out their anger on a nearby field. On the other hand, salting a field is no more complicated in 2023 than it was from the years 20 to 23. And while water wells might today be poisoned with more deadly stuff, a poisoned well is a poisoned well no matter which spigot you drink from. Scorched earth tactics are one of those ways of warfighting that have existed for as long as people have been at war. As far back as Egypt and Mesopotamia, the historical record indicates the deliberate destruction of agriculturally productive fields and orchards used as leverage to force a retreating or beleaguered enemy to surrender and stop the carnage rather than starve. In Egyptian campaigns against Syro-Palestine, Egyptian forces were described as having burned towns and settlements down and destroyed plantations and forests surrounding enemy forts. In the 6th century BCE, the Scythians used scorched earth tactics against enemies within the Achaemenid Empire, poisoning their wells and using asymmetric attacks to whittle down their food supplies. In his account of the expedition of the 10,000 in the 4th century BCE, the Greek general Xenophon described his enemies' use of scorched earth tactics, burning grasses and creating a wasteland in the territories where Xenophon's mercenary army was expected to travel. Elsewhere in ancient Greece, the Spartans would do the same, laying waste to the countryside around Athens in an attempt to force starvation and surrender. But the first ancient power to really perfect the use of scorched earth tactics was probably, unsurprisingly, ancient Rome, whose approach to the practice was the stuff of nightmares for many enemies that the Romans faced. Under Roman assault, the large-scale slaughter of enemy-held livestock, the building of dams, and the poisoning of water stores were all to be expected, and at times that Rome was forced into retreats, it used the same tactics to deny resources to the armies that followed after them. At the conclusion of the Third Punic War, the Roman Senate elected to employ an extreme version of scorched earth tactics, dismantling the entire city of Carthage and burning the surrounding fields, although the common belief that Rome salted the earth in the area appears to only be an element of mythology around the event. In retaliation...
Hold on. Is that a trebuchet catapult? Is that... It has like a big iron hand or something? Bronze? I have never seen that, and that seems like a kind of good idea. I've only ever seen did I say trebuchets? I meant... No. I meant, is that a battering ram battering ram catapult? Or battering ram trebuchet, whatever. Tree bucket. I've never seen that, and it looks like that's what this is, and that seems like a good idea.
Common belief.
Much better than a swinging one, right?
Punic War, the Roman Senate elected to employ an extreme version of scorched earth tactics, dismantling the entire city of Carthage and burning the surrounding fields, although the common belief that Rome salted the earth in the area appears to only be an element of mythology around the event. In retaliation against Rome, its enemies would also employ Scorched-Earth tactics, including the Gauls under chieftain Vercingetorix, who took it upon themselves to obliterate a series of villages and farms that he believed the Romans were counting on in order to press an attack against him. A few centuries later, the Islamic world got its first major taste of Scorched-Earth tactics when in the 7th century CE, an Umayyad army marched on modern western Saudi Arabia and Yemen in order to ravage the lands of a rival caliph. In the attack, the Umayyads killed tens of thousands of civilians under their rival's protection, and they went a step further, burning crops and homes in order to make the sections of the caliphate they'd touched all but uninhabitable for the future. During the many centuries of medieval European warfare, Scorched-Earth tactics made plenty of appearances on one side or another, both in the wars fought between European powers in a given area and in wars of expansion outward. During these years, many societies that relied on feudal structures of land cultivation would find not just their land, but their poor serf civilians to be a target of Scorched-Earth warfare. After all, killing serfs meant destroying the means of production for a given area's food resources. In France and the Iberian Peninsula, tactics called chevauchée in French, or cabalgada in Spanish, arose during the 100 Years' War, with the general idea being that small groups of mounted soldiers would take hostages, capture goods,
What?
serfs meant destroying the means of production for a given area's food resources. In France and the Iberian Peninsula, tactics called chevauchée in French, or cabalgada in Spanish, arose during the 100 Years' War, with the general idea being that small groups of mounted soldiers would take hostages, capture goods, and destroy infrastructure in the countryside in order to back the enemy into a corner without engaging in large-scale military engagements. In the 16th century, Scorched-Earth warfare would make a comeback in the British Isles, a tool of conquest used by English invaders of Ireland. During the 30 Years' War, the same tactics were used by the Holy Roman Empire in order to deny lands and villages to an advancing Swedish enemy force. Around this same time, Scorched-Earth tactics were well employed in...
I would not want to be one of those guys that was the job, because I feel like you could be cornered or taken out in some way. That one of the people like sent to like capture people, because if you're caught, then they're gonna really be angry at you, more so than just if you were a soldier in battle, and probably torture and kill you. And I feel like the chance of getting caught is higher because there's less people around. And
Maratha Empire, on what is now modern-day India, when ruler Shivaji I coined the phrase Ganimi Kava to represent the same policies of warfare we've been referring to as Scorched Earth. In this case, it was leveraged against the Mughal Empire, destroying the Mughals' commercial interests and civilian population centers. Shivaji I's son would later be sentenced to death by the Mughals as punishment for his having employed Scorched Earth tactics, including in sustained offensives that ravaged the Mughal territories. And in the New World, Scorched Earth tactics would be deployed en masse a century later, when an American campaign in 1779 laid waste to some 40 or more villages belonging to the native Iroquois and destroyed the essential supplies these communities had stockpiled to survive the winter. In the campaigns of Napoleon Bonaparte across Europe, Scorched Earth tactics were not a favored mechanism to secure control over enemy populations by Napoleon himself, but instead they were a tactic used against him by more than one adversary. During his 1810 invasion of Portugal, Portuguese defenders destroyed their own food stores across large portions of the country in order to not allow those supplies into French hands. And in Napoleon's march on Russia, retreating Tsarist forces burned the countryside they left behind, rendering Napoleon's army incapable of living off the land as they had expected they could do. With their sustenance nowhere.
I feel like Russia is the ideal country to have to employ scorched earth, because there's not that much protection from the European kind of giant corridor above the Alps and is it Carpathians? But you know, through Poland into them, and you just have so much land and scorch that earth, and it's going to be really hard for people to go through
where to be found.
Living off
Napoleon's
the land.
forces were screwed in a major way, and before long, Russian winter arrived to finish the job. In the American Civil War, Union forces pursued a Scorched Earth policy on more than one occasion, but they did so most notably during Major General William Tecumseh Sherman's so-called March to the Sea, an offensive that was meant to break their rival Confederacy's will to fight. First, Sherman's armies set upon the city of Atlanta, turning it to ruins and destroying anything that could aid the Confederate military apparatus. Then the Carolinas got the same treatment, with infrastructure like railroads and tunnels destroyed and crops and livestock annihilated wherever they were found. The strategy, uncompromising despite it being levied against communities that the United States hoped to reintegrate after the war, would eventually of its intended effect. Unfortunately, Scorched-Earth tactics have been used across history as a weapon of colonial powers in order to break the will of insurgencies that seek to fight against them. Since militaries operating on colonial soil often have little reason to account for the safety or prosperity of civilians who might be in their way and are unlikely to face repercussion for wiping out an indigenous population that is often demonized or belittled as less than human.
I'll go back 10 seconds, sister.
Prosperity of civilians.
So big question. I haven't really, it hasn't really been answered for me. Maybe you guys can enlighten me, or if hopefully I didn't miss it. If it was, is that what qualifies something, like what tips over a strategy of destruction to being one of Scorched Earth? Like if you just like rip up a railway as you go along and don't destroy anything else, is that still Scorched Earth? I mean, you're still like Scorched Earth is such an intense term, you know, it seems like a complete transforming something into a hellscape, but do you have to do that to be considered Scorched Earth, or can you do much more minor things? And when do a bunch of little things add up to a Scorched Earth, you know? Yeah.
Who might be in their way and are unlikely to face repercussion for wiping out an indigenous population that is often demonized or belittled as less than human. In the Philippine-American War at the turn of the 20th century, American forces destroyed entire villages and poisoned many water wells during their rampage across the South Asian islands. They would also use Scorched-Earth tactics against the Navajo in the mid-1860s, destroying just about everything the Navajo tribe had previously had to its name. Britain would do the same to the Boers in what would become modern-day South Africa, targeting farms and homes in order to prevent Boer forces from fighting a guerrilla war whilst living off the land and placing Boer women and children in concentration camps. The First World War saw its fair share of Scorched-Earth tactics from Imperial Russian use of the policy that saw huge swaths of earth, including entire cities, defiled during a retreat along a 600-mile front, to British tactics in Romania, where oil fields were burned rather than being left for potential recapture by the Central Powers. However, the mostly inert trench warfare of the time left less opportunity for these tactics than might have otherwise existed. In World War II, the tactic was used far more widely, with Finland in particular giving the Soviet Red Army hell during the 1939 Winter War, destroying their own homes rather than letting them fall into enemy hands. The Soviets and the Germans would use the same tactics against each other, with Germany imposing a Scorched Earth policy onto the city of Novgorod, and the Soviets doing it to their own territory a few years prior in order to thwart Nazi advances of mid-1941. At the end of World War II, Adolf Hitler unsuccessfully attempted to order his forces to destroy German infrastructure in order to prevent its use by the Allies, although Hitler's top lieutenants refused to carry these orders out. The conflict also saw the first widespread use of carpet bombing in places like Dresden, Berlin, and Tokyo, where schools, religious sites, homes, and hospitals were subject to the same campaign of annihilation as everything else.
You see, like the Ho Chi Minh Trail, I think it was called, in Vietnam, where America like just carpet bombed the way and just wanted to completely annihilate the forest so that like Vietnamese soldiers couldn't hide for guerrilla maneuvers.
After the advent of carpet bombing, humans found another, even newer way to embark on Scorched Earth campaigns: the use of defoliants, and in particular, Agent Orange. Britain would use the stuff in its Malayan emergency to destroy rice fields and patches of trees that could be used as cover for ambushes, while in Vietnam, the United States would use it for a similar purpose at far greater volume. Scorched Earth tactics also saw use in the Persian Gulf War, perpetrated by Iraq, when the retreating nation made the decision to set Kuwaiti oil wells afire, and in the Yugoslav wars, where they were a tool of all sides to target each other's civilians. The Soviets would use Scorched Earth tactics in Afghanistan, and its descendant modern-day Russia would keep the same cycle going during the First and Second Chechen Wars. In the modern day, Scorched Earth tactics are something of a forbidden fruit where military conduct is concerned. Unfortunately, though, that doesn't mean people don't use them. Instead, they're employed nearly exclusively by regimes and militaries that don't particularly care about the international backlash and condemnation, or otherwise see such a response as part of the price of doing business. One such entity is the ruling regime of the South Asian nation Myanmar, where a military junta has engaged in Scorched Earth warfare for years at the time of writing. But rather than being targeted at an outside enemy, Myanmar Myanmar's Scorched Earth policy is directed towards the country's own citizens, scaling up from military-led massacres of Myanmar's ethnic minorities, particularly the Rohingya peoples. Myanmar's junta now operates a campaign against anyone and everyone in the nation seen as standing contrary to the junta's authority. That's a lot of people in Myanmar, most of whom are powerless to resist the airstrikes that the junta uses as its primary means of war-making. Not only civilians, but their homes, their communities, the fields they tend, and the animals they support are in the crosshairs of Myanmar's military, with the intentional displacement of civilians from their homes appearing to be one of the military's major objectives. Pivoting from Myanmar, let's travel to Ukraine, where Russia's ongoing invasion into sovereign Ukraine lands has turned very dark within the past year. Since the start of the conflict, Russia has been accused of using Scorched-Earth tactics, but those accusations have grown far louder after its ongoing assault on the small city of Bakhmut, which was transformed into a meat grinder over the course of several horrific months of warfare. According to the area's Ukrainian defenders, Russian forces have pursued a deliberate policy of razing Bakhmut's homes, municipal buildings, and businesses to the ground in order to eliminate those buildings as potentially defensible locations for Ukrainian soldiers. Elsewhere in the war, Russia has targeted civilian power infrastructure, hospitals, kindergartens, and locations where civilians have attempted to hide out from missile strikes and artillery shelling. But nowhere in Russia's offensive has its preference for Scorched-Earth tactics been clearer than in its destruction of the Kakhovka Dam. Until mid-2023, the dam held back a giant reservoir on the Dnipro River, but it's believed to have been mined by Russian forces in advance of an attack in which the dam was expected to fall back into Ukrainian control. Rather than allow that to happen, Russia is widely believed to have been responsible for the explosions that blew the dam, causing a massive flood downriver that brought to ruin hundreds of communities that had relied on the Dnipro to support their way of life. Not only that, but agriculture and fisheries within the Dnipro's watershed have now been either flooded out, if they were in the path of the water, or otherwise deprived of irrigation in the Ukrainian south. With that destruction comes the forced relocation of tens of thousands of people who previously lived on that land. But according to a range of international experts, that's precisely the effect that Putin and his advisors sought to achieve with the dam's destruction. As time goes on, it appears likely that Scorched-Earth policies will become more and more attacktive of pariah states and loners on the international stage, a small collection of military powers that seem to care more about total destruction of the enemy than they do about the preservation of life, or even the preservation of the territory they're trying to win. Luckily for everybody, the pool of nations willing to adopt Scorched-Earth policy seems to be getting smaller, but how long it might be until Scorched-Earth warfare is a thing of the past, we simply can't say.
Probably never. I don't know if it's been around forever. If there's war in the future, I'm sure there's going to be some sort of scorched earth. What do I know? Okay. What do I know? Great video. Again, from War Graphics. There is a people are messed up. I tried to. I feel like people are pretty similar biologically, right? Genetically. But I often find myself like, would I do this stuff? You know? Like, if I was a general born in Myanmar, or if I was in, I don't know. Just when I see really crazy stuff here, I feel weird, like pointing out, like, oh, they're horrible. Clearly they are, but like, how am I different exactly? Would I do that? You know, would I hope you guys are doing well. Love y'all. I'd appreciate it if you liked and subscribed, and hopefully I'll see you next time we can watch a video and learn something. Okay, bye guys.